Welcome to the OFX podcast. I'm Dave Claxton. With me, as always, and this is not an alliteration, is not stuck in Atlanta, Bethany.
I am not, thank
We're
goodness.
not stuck in Atlanta. And not Corinna Coffin, Corinna Perkins.
That's right.
How long did it take you to get used to saying it?
Oh man. I honestly, it took 3 years to get the name changed officially, and then probably another year, which might be to now, to get used to saying that. But
Or
yeah.
like creating a new signature. I found that really weird at first too.
Yeah, I can't sign. Like I don't know, I'm used to just doing a bunch of scribbles, but I feel like with Perkins, I don't know, the K and then the I, like I just feel like I have to be more precise, and I feel like I take forever to sign my last name.
So before we get into the real stuff, which is actually like important things that Corinna talks about, I will go into why I'm stuck in Atlanta. We'll do the I'm stuck in Atlanta thing. So, and part of it is kind of sad, not for me. Me is a mild inconvenience for me. But the other part is that so I came out of from DECA and in Florida, flying out of Orlando in the morning, had a long layover in Atlanta. Get to Atlanta, have the layover, we get on the plane, and then we get word that as they announced it on the plane, there's been an incident, and we've got to wait a few minutes to see if they can clear it up. And we're like, okay, so we didn't know what that means, we figured something was snow or whatever, right? And then eventually they pull us off the plane. And just as they're pulling us off the plane, everybody starts getting on their phone little news reports. In Toronto Airport, there was a crash. And somehow I think they landed the plane and then rolled said plane, flipped it over. And this is the sad part is some people, as far as I know, some people were hurt, but there was no fatalities. So that's great. But
There's a few people in critical, but
yeah,
it's so far no one's, yeah.
and I mean, so hopefully, fingers crossed that's the important part. But then the part for me that gets annoying is I'm all waiting there the whole time, and then we go to the counter, and by the time I get to the counter line where they're like, we're rescheduling your flight, they said, okay, great, we can get you back Wednesday at 9:45 p.m. I'm like, that's 2 days from now. And they said, yeah. And I'm like, well, are you going to give me like a hotel or something? And they're like, no. And I'm like, what? They're like, we're not obligated to do anything. It's bad weather. I'm like, you flipped a plane.
Yeah.
This is not
Oh,
bad weather. You flipped a plane.
Mhm.
And I said to the lady at the counter, I'm like, if I crash my car because it's snowing, the insurance company says it's my fault. You flipped a plane. It's your fault. It's on you.
that
Anyway,
is absurd.
yeah, so there was a lot of upset people, and my upset is still, I'm mostly just joking and having fun, even though I am upset. But some people were really bad. And there was a whole thing and everything, and we got the whole. But by the time we got done, a little while after, because my thought was, okay, now they're not paying for a hotel, so I'm going to go get a rental car and just drive home.
Oh.
If it's gonna, because it's I think it's like 16 hours, and it's going to cost me two nights in a hotel and not being home. I'm like, I'll just drive home. And then finally, I get these emails. Oh, here's a voucher for a hotel that essentially we said we weren't going to give you, but now we are, which means they admitted it's not weather. So that means I got to get another night because I'm still here till Wednesday. So now I got to call tomorrow and fight for the second night. But anyway, so yeah, I am in Atlanta.
Well, I feel like if you get the first night, it kind of justifies the second night. It's like, hey,
Right.
Yeah,
if they're going to admit to that, then they kind of owe you the second
sure,
too.
exactly.
Mhm.
So I'm pretty sure I'll get it.
Mhm.
But yeah, so it was either this or I have to stay at Matt B. Davis's house, and he has kids, and I don't want to stay there.
Gosh.
No offense,
Well,
man. I just don't want to. I don't want to be around children. I got rid of mine. I don't need yours.
thanks for still doing this. I probably would have just canceled like or rescheduled, but
No, I was excited, and Beth and I we've been really looking forward to it. And the thought was originally, I'm like, because we talked about it, and I'm like, I'm supposed to land at 5 p.m., drive home, takes me an hour, we'll be good to go. All great. And we still are good to go, and we are right on time. We're just
Yep.
in
It
a
shows Dave's commitment to the podcast, truly.
we're just in a different country. Beth is the only Canadian here now.
Yeah.
Anyway, Beth, yeah. Beth, take us in the proper direction. Enough of me complaining and complaining.
Yeah. So, Corinna, we've been so excited to talk to you. We do have so many questions too. So, you're a registered dietitian, and as far as I understand, you do focus a lot on performance nutrition and working with athletes
Yeah.
within, and you have a private practice.
Yes, exactly. So that's
Mhm.
been fun. And with dietitians, n- not you know, similar but different, of course, to doctors, but in the sense that they're specialties within, any doctor has a specialty, a subspecialty, right? And so similarly with dietetics, once we pass our the national board exam, after X amount of hours in the field that we're interested in pursuing, we can specialize in, those subspecialties. So some dietitians specialize in like eating disorders, other ones are in maybe like diabetes educators, and then like there's sports dietitians within that. So that's a different, like a subset kind of credential that I wanted to make sure I worked toward early on in my dietetics career, because yeah, this is definitely, performance is the primary focus and aspect of nutrition that I'm most passionate about.
Yeah. And and that's one of the reasons that I'm excited to talk to you too, because I have this conversation with my clients all the time that performance nutrition is not the same as you get some like cookie cutter diet program, online, or especially or if it comes from someone who's like the bodybuilding type stream. And I'm like, this is not going to work with how we train as athletes. Like it is different. And it's sometimes hard for people to wrap their heads around that, like certain things are much more important, and we do we do require a lot out of our bodies, and so the fueling piece is just so crucial. And a lot of people really do make some mistakes for sure when it comes to performance nutrition. So
Yeah.
I thought we could, kind of help a lot of our listeners would be in that athlete bracket, and their performance nutrition would be um what they would be focusing on. So that's kind of where our questions do center around. So then from in your, and this is all of the questions again that I've written out for you could be like a whole hour podcast in themselves, I'm sure. Um, so we'll kind of try to touch on a bunch of things anyways to just give people, and if we don't get to all the things that I wanted to talk about, we can always do a second one too. So when you have a client that comes to you first, what do you see initially? And we'll say this is an athlete. What do you see first and most often as some glaring mistakes that people are making when it comes to performance nutrition?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, I was thinking about that question as I was reading it from your email. And I think the biggest one is not prioritizing nutrition at all, or not seeing that as almost an equal priority as the training, because all the three of us know countless of athletes who spend so much time, energy, resources in the training programs, and having personalized coaches, the races, traveling to and from races, there's yet so the larger percentage of that population might just, like, food might be an afterthought, or nutrition might just be something that they're just like scrambling to come up with right at mealtime, instead of thinking ahead about, what are their needs, what are their struggle areas, what things do they know that they need to kind of prep or plan out ahead of time so that they can execute appropriately. So I think that's the number one thing, is just, not prioritizing it. And then also with that, like, not recognizing that it can help them achieve so much more. Like, even some of the best or top athletes, we might all look at them and be like, wow, that individual is so skilled, is at the top of their sport. But if they're not prioritizing or paying attention to their nutrition, they're probably leaving a whole lot of potential out on the table that they could, even become even better.
hmm So then within that, would you say, because like I know how I feel about this when I deal with my own clients, are people generally under consuming or over consuming? And then within that, I wanted to ask you too about calorie counting and macro counting. So do you do this within your program, and when would each be more appropriate?
Yeah. So as far as so to answer the first part of your question, I think I see it all, of course. I see a lot of overconsumption and underconsumption, but I will say more so, I feel like our athletic population is a bit more in tune with their nutrition in the sense of like, even though it's might not, for many, it might not be a priority. I feel like the ones that it is a priority to end up being undernourished or underfueled because they're so focused on this clean eating, right? Or they're so focused on like, okay, I can only put the very best, like most nutrient dense foods in my body. And they end up being like, okay, I'm going to restrict like no gluten. I don't do added sugars. And they end up restricting the pool of foods that they can choose from, and it ends up just not being enough, or it makes it so inconvenient to eat well that they're almost, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot because they're creating restrictions when there doesn't need to be, and now they're limiting their food choices. But at the same time, there's another camp too where there's this maybe newer concept to some folks where you can be overfueled and undernourished. So that means like maybe from a total calorie standpoint, you're fine. Maybe you're getting plenty of calories, but what you're consuming is not meeting your nutrient needs. It's very easy to, especially with all the with food manufacturing and all the processed and ultra processed foods around us and convenience foods, it's very easy to get food and calorie for the most part, right? I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about individuals in food deserts around, in the US and outside of the US, but for the most part, we have easily available and accessible foods, but especially with athletes and active individuals, we're on the go a lot. And so convenience foods can just be the thing where it's like, oh, you know what? I'm not going to make breakfast. I'm going to just grab a bar from, the convenience store, or I just loaded up on a bunch of bars from Costco and that's my breakfast. And now it's like in one camp, that might not be enough, but in other camps, like if that's the philosophy of nutrition throughout the day, it's very easy to get adequate calories perhaps, but you're missing whole grains and fiber and fruits and vegetables. You're missing quality lean and protein sources. You're missing out on like healthy fats, and maybe your just overall dietary fat intake is quite high because that tends to be, most of our processed and ultra processed foods are laden with lots of oils that just aren't really the top healthy fats that we're trying to get into our diet.
Well,
I,
that's just, sorry.
I got a question about that. So were you talking about essentially basically too many calories, but not enough quality calories? I guess so.
That too many calories, not enough nutrients, because
And
we have
this,
a
yeah, and I'll say this. This is probably me, right? Because I'm a guy who I burn a lot of calories. I work out, I exercise a lot, I do a lot of things. I really, I do a lot of performance, especially for my
And
age.
you have a physical job.
I have a physical job, but I also am the same kind of guy who struggles with like a body fat percentage.
Mhm.
And from what you're saying there, would that likely be kind of the scenario to promote a situation like that?
It very well could. And I find that like a lot of people who are highly active yet really struggle with body composition. And maybe they're like, maybe it's less about reducing they come to me and might be like, man, I know I need to like decrease my calories, but also like I feel really tired during my training sessions. And like, I don't want to cut too many calories because then I'm not going to perform well. And so it's like a lot of times it's looking at food quality. It's like, hey, let's focus less about restriction and focusing on total calories. So to kind of get back to your other question, Bethany, about like calories
Mm.
versus macros, and more so like, let's focus on the quality, the food, what is comprising those calories. And so, when it comes to macro counting versus calorie counting versus like, I use a little bit of both sometimes in my practice, and it's very personalized to the individual. So it depends on who's like, who's coming to me, what their history is. Like some people come to me with a history of tracking calories and macros. And, if they've done that in their past and it still is getting them to a point where they're not satisfied with their nutrition, clearly like they were so focused on the numbers that they were missing this key point, which is what we're talking about, which is food quality. And that's a really important part of my coaching that I really focus on, is not just from a number standpoint, but really like what is that food comprised of? What are your meals and snacks look like? How are we getting proper nourishment, and those essential nutrients that your body needs to get through food that we can't make ourselves, but we're not going to get through your, like a lot of your processed foods. And so a lot of it is, if my approach, sure, we can use macros and calories. It's actually interesting, Bethany, because I know you were like, which one? But it's like, sometimes the simplest way, like total calories is important to look at. We need to know, like, when Dave, if you came to me and you were like, okay, like, here's my height, weight, age, like, here's a couple days worth of my like typical food intake. And then I might look at that, but I'm also going to plug in, those data points into an energy, estimator calculator. So like there's plenty out there, and you can go online or you can just plug it into the equations. But that's going to estimate your energy needs. So we got to pay attention to that to a degree. It's not the only thing that we're not going to put all of our eggs in that basket of like, it said that Dave needs 2,600 calories. So that's what we're going to like, that must be it. Of course, there's going to be, we have metabolic changes in metabolic rates that can affect that and your physical activity and all that. But if we're going off of that, I might use the 2,600 calorie target and then a protein target for you, and have you focus primarily on those things if you're tracking, in addition to food quality. So like, I don't care always so much about like the nitty gritty fat and carbs and protein all together, because that's, for someone who's not used to that, that's a lot of different numbers to like focus on. And if we're focusing on food quality, and I'm teaching you how to build meals and how to look at your plate and identify aspects of your plate that are important, like this is, about how much protein should take up. And this is, we need to make sure we have amount of carbohydrates that reflects your training demands for the day. And we need to find like a healthy source of fats, and there should be colors on your plate. Like if you're good at doing that, chances are you're probably within the ranges, like adequate ranges for your macronutrients. And maybe you need help at first to kind of make sure you're staying within your calorie budget, Dave, like 2,600, or maybe we don't even focus on that. Maybe we just start with the visual cues and the food quality and see how you're progressing before we introduce numbers. Sorry, I know that was long-winded, but that's such a big part of like what I take pride in as a coach, of like how I approach nutrition, because I feel like you find a lot of programs out there that are just like numbers based, like calories and macros, and you don't find a lot of the coaching programs that are looking at the food quality. But I think that's hard to do in cookie cutter programs. Like that's where you kind of, it really helps to have the one-on-one coaching aspect in some scenarios.
It's got to be a hard sell to tell someone who's been working out like diligently and like consistently, who still struggles with that. And it must be a hard sell to tell them, yeah, we still need you to eat more. We just need different. Like that's got to be a hard sell.
Yeah. And I probably wouldn't go out the gates with that. Like normally it's like, okay, well, usually, because so for example, like I'll have individuals come to me and they're like, okay, I really want, to change, I want to change my body composition. I want to increase lean muscle mass, drop fat mass, but also I have these competitions coming up, and like, and I want to do well in these. So I'm like, okay, first of all, we got to look at your year as a whole and decide what is the first priority, right? Because if you have a bunch of races coming up very soon, especially if they're like your top A races, we're probably going to want to prioritize performance as the top thing, and put body composition secondary. Or what I often the approach I love to take is, let's focus on performance. And obviously throughout this process, we'll look at your food quality. We'll make sure that within hitting the appropriate macros to meet your energy needs, that we're focusing on food quality. And with that, you will probably experience some benefits in your body composition just by doing that process, but without being weight focused. You're just focusing on performance, food quality. We're making sure you're fueled adequately. And that oftentimes addresses some of those body composition concerns. And then after all those A races are done, or once the season kind of is like, oh, it's just for fun, now we can put more of our attention on body composition as the primary goal.
Mhm. And okay, I have, yeah, there's so many things I was like, oh, I gotta ask about that. But so talking about to like manipulating the body within like your actual race season, um, I used to also like when I used to race track, we always had race weight. And we were always trying to manipulate to hit race weight. Is that something that you ever did too as an athlete and that you would recommend to people?
I fortunately I never experienced that. I think because I wasn't competing at a collegiate level in a sport that like I did club lacrosse and I did triathlon. I was really during my college years and for high school, like that was never the case. Thankfully, like I am so I feel fortunate to have had like only positive experiences with that. But again, like I'm not like if you're cutting weight, especially in your season, like that might naturally happen a little bit as training load picks up and intensity picks up. And so that might happen a little bit by default. And that's not normally a big deal, especially if you're still prioritizing, you know, performance fueling. But I much prefer, that's why I like looking at the whole year for an athlete and identifying what are the areas, like what are the periods of time where we can afford to be a little bit more cut oriented or body composition focused, where performance, like we can take a hit performance wise, because you know, short term, sure, you can experience some deficits and lose some fat mass or just overall mass during a season, and it for a short period of time that probably won't impact you negatively. But the hard part is like, especially for all of us, we're in this hybrid sport that's like year round, and so the problem is we don't really have this, it's kind of like this ongoing season all year round, or it very well can be. And so that's why I think it's important to identify, okay, well, what races really matter the most to you, even if you're racing year round? What's the ones that matter the most to you, and what ones are can we be okay if we don't perform the greatest because we're focusing on body composition? What time of the year can is that? And then that when we can dive in a little bit more with those other goals.
That's funny. I mean, I think about that and thought about that for training's perspective for, forever. That was always, what's your A goal, your A, B, C race, whatever. I never thought about that from the nutrition perspective of like,
Yeah.
I almost periodizing nutrition. That's weird. That's a foreign concept to me.
Well, and it's an important one because I think a lot of people think that their nutrition just has like, you know, just it stays constant, and it's just like, you know, and yes, while we have like habits and behaviors that probably should be consistent most days throughout the year, it's like, yeah, you know, your nutrition changes based off the demands. And, you know, and we know that based off your physical demands and your training demands. And so if that changes over the course of the year, then we certainly want to make sure that nutrition wise, like we're honing in on, you know, those demands. Or like in an off season period, hopefully we'll have a period of time where you can chill out a little bit. It's like, okay, you might, instead of eating 3,000 calories because you're training like 4 or 5 hours a day and doing doubles and like you're on your feet because you're a personal trainer as well. It's like, if that's, you know, if you're with the more we demand from our bodies, the more we have to be on point with our nutrition. Because if we don't, we're going to have a huge gap in that. We're going to see that in injuries, getting sick, poor performance. And so when we're chilling out a little bit, we finally have an off season. We're not putting in all those hours of training. Yeah, maybe you're instead of 3,000 calories, maybe your needs are closer to like 2,300 calories. And that's, while it's less calories, it's like it's much less stress on you for like, oh, now I like 3,000 calories is a chore for a lot of people, you know, to hit, especially if their physical output is high. So in periods where their physical output's lower, they can simply adjust their nutrition back a little bit, not stress about it. It might actually be more conducive to body composition changes because there's less stress, like, you know, activity training is stress on the body. It changes your cortisol levels and impacts that. And so we have to take that into account. And we should have periods of time where we're less loosening up on that a little bit.
Um, I wanted to ask you about fasting because I get asked all the time, should I be eating before my 6 a.m. class? How do you feel about fasted cardio? And my my opinion has been a little bit lucid lately just because there's things coming at you from all angles too. And I know there's differences also, which you can touch on too with like men and women and if this is appropriate and, different times in women's cycle. And I just watched a podcast with Dr. Mindy Petz and she wrote the book Fasting Like a Girl. And, she's obviously a huge proponent of fasting. And so there's just so many mixed ideas that I have about it. And I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it at any point. So what do you recommend then, like with fasted cardio or, even to the other extreme, well, fasted cardio, and then we have intermittent fasting or, the trendy 3-day fast, water fast. That's what people are talking about right now too.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense that you kind of go back and forth because it's like, it really depends on the situation and the individual, whether that's appropriate or not, and the time that they're training, right? Fasting, pushing breakfast back a little bit. If you're not training first thing in the morning, that's probably not going to be that big of a deal, right? Especially if we're hitting all of our nutrient needs for the day in that time frame. I think it's important to know that like fasting and maybe obviously hopefully it goes without saying, but it's catabolic, right? That means like there's breakdown occurring during that time frame. So depending on what your goals are, like if you're trying to increase lean muscle mass, which is oftentimes a goal with individuals who want body composition changes, there's a level of anabolism, which is the opposite of catabolism, right? It's building up. Like we need that to build lean muscle mass. Like we can't just be in this constant state of breakdown, breakdown, if we're trying to build muscle. And so if that's a primary goal of yours, fasting really doesn't have a place for you, I think. But I also think, do we need a period of time where our bodies don't have food in it and can undergo like basically the nighttime cleaning ladies or cleaning men, right? Like, or the janitor stuff, like there needs to be certain processes and excretion of waste products and cell cleaning, like a lot of those things can only happen with longer periods of time without food in our bodies. And so that's where it can be helpful to kind of look at your eating window and notice like what time do you start, what time do you end, and can you adjust that a little bit, right? Like there's definitely some physiological benefits from like periods of fasting, even 12 hours or less, right? And so that's a fairly big window. But if you're a kind of individual you're waking up super early to train, you're missing out on performance benefits that by going into a hard training session fasted. So my general rule of thumb is like if you have a hard training session and or a longer training session, so anything like 45, anything above 45 minutes or so, that's like hard. Like 45 minutes would probably be my cutoff of like anything longer than that. It's like you need a little bit of carbohydrate at least beforehand. If you're doing anything high intensity or just over that 45-minute period, those carbs are going to go a long way. And also, again, like for body composition, thinking about protein intake, like you're coming off an overnight fast, your body hasn't your body doesn't store protein. So we don't store protein overnight. So, there's some breakdown happening overnight, which is normal for us. But then if we wake up, we don't eat anything. And then we go into more breakdown, a higher state of breakdown because we're strength training or doing HIIT or running. And like all of that is even more catabolic. So now we've had this huge span of time between sleep and training where all our body has done is breakdown. And so that it requires a greater response to try and recover from that. And you also miss an opportunity to get more out of your training by fueling for it. So I think a lot of people, especially when it comes to weight and body composition, they're thinking like, how can I eat less throughout the day? But instead of thinking like, how can I eat appropriately to get more out of, my training for the day or get more out of my workouts? Um, so with fasting, I think that that's, I think you got to consider when you're training, and anything over 45 minutes, anything like high intensity or a little bit longer, like should warrant at least some carbohydrates. But protein and carbohydrates is like that sweet spot if you can get that first thing in the morning, because if you can have a little bit of protein on board before you're undergoing training that's going to break down your muscles even more, that's protective, and it's going to help you, again, it's going to help or prevent your body from breaking down more muscle during that time frame.
Yeah, I always tell my clients, even just like a scoop of collagen in your coffee as you're going to the gym, you get your 10 grams of protein, and like it's at least a little bit of something on board, and then a little bit of glycogen too. So it makes a big difference with, but the 6 a.m.ers sometimes are rolling out of bed at 5:45 and
Yeah.
just like,
I know. And that's such a big area that I work on with clients, is like, okay, the people who are like, I can't eat. I wake up like, and I just go right to the gym. It's like, I have no time. It's like, okay, well, part of it is just getting familiar with what foods like disrupt you the least, right? The idea is to get carbs on board that make you feel good for your training, but don't disrupt your stomach in any way, cause any GI upset. And it's like, can you eat a banana, like half a banana? Can you do an applesauce packet? Can you do a like little fig Newton or a fig bar? Can you do a clementine or two? And these are things that we grow accustomed to over time. So maybe you start with something really small and then you slowly build up from there. Or maybe certain mornings you have really chill workouts, like maybe it's just a zone 2, like 30-minute run. Okay, you're probably fine without anything before then. But then maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're taking a class, like a HIIT class, and it's like, okay, well, Tuesdays and Thursdays should be your days to like prioritize getting something a little bit more. So, and I was going to say one thing on your Bethany with your collagen, like it's good to take collagen before a workout, because, and vitamin C, because that's going to help if you're taking it for like joint and tendon strengthening. That's a good way for it to get into your like those lower blood flow areas. It's like before a workout. But this is where, like, if you truly can't get any protein in before your workout because it's first thing in the morning and you don't want to eat anything more than just the carbs, that's where like essential amino acids or BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, those can be handy from a sense of like they're not going to help you build more protein. They're only 3 amino acids, and you need a complete, protein with all the essential amino acids to build muscle, but it can help prevent some of that muscle breakdown. So that's, I know we'll probably get to supplements at one point, but like that would be a perfect scenario where, okay, can you drink, if you're already drinking like water or coffee or pre-workout, you can just add those into that, and it's going to at least be a little bit better than nothing.
yeah, mitigate the damage a little bit.
Exactly.
Mhm.
The collagen thing for me, that's not something that I ever do before, but you just said before workout. How long? Because you
Like
said,
20 to 30 minutes before the idea is that, because especially again, this is not like, so hair, skin, nails, benefits for collagen, you can take that any time of your day, and that's going to be totally great for that reason, for those reasons. If your focus is more on joint and tendon repair, like especially from injuries or just strengthening in rehab, first you want to pair it with some form of vitamin C, which can just be like, most fruits, but strawberries, oranges, whatnot, like have a little clementine or have a little orange juice to drink with it. Um, and and uh, and the idea is that to get into those joint capsules, like those are really, those lack a lot of circulation and blood flow over the course of like a typical sedentary day. But in motion, as we're training, all those areas, like blood is flowing profusely throughout our body. And so that collagen will now get carried into those parts of the body that otherwise it probably wouldn't get in there as effectively. So yeah, just, as however soon as you can before your workout, but that 20 to 30 minutes prior should be, or you can even drink it during if you have a long workout and just want to take it in the beginning and still effective towards the end.
So you said vitamin C with the collagen. And I was always under the understanding that you don't want to take antioxidants like soon after a workout.
Yeah, yeah, but I think like it's not going to take much vitamin C. and it's not like you can't take any of antioxidants. That's more so supplemental antioxidants. I think a lot of people are, I think some people, are tend to be of the mindset like, oh, well, if, I want to decrease inflammation and, after, if a workout is pro-inflammatory or like can cause some inflammation, why wouldn't I just offset that with anti-inflammatory, like antioxidants after a workout, and I'll just supplement with that because it's easier than just eating whole foods. And so usually the potency of those supplemental forms of antioxidants are so much greater that they'll actually negate some of the adaptations that we want our body to make in the presence of that stress response. So don't worry. I wouldn't worry about like especially because the vitamin C and collagen, that would be beforehand anyway. But it's going to be in such a small amount. You don't need a ton of it. And, vitamin C, there are components that are like antioxidants in there, but it's not like it's not the primary.
Yeah.
Yeah. For antioxidants.
Mm-hmm.
Right, go ahead.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, so then the other thing with the fasted piece, and again, this could be a whole podcast in itself, but when you program your nutritional stuff, is there differences that are substantial for your men and your women clients?
I would say so. This is an area that is gaining more traction now that I think, like, especially with a lot of emphasis on women's nutrition needs, especially around menstrual cycles and just because of our reproductive health and those differences. So it's exciting that there's more research where it's like, instead of just taking all these studies with men because they don't they don't have all these
Easier.
they don't have all these fluctuations over the course of a typical month. Like, it's cool to see that there's a lot of studies that are including more female population, so we can understand that better. I think the biggest ones have more to do with the biggest gender, like nutrition differences based on gender, are going to be as a result of our menstrual cycle. And then, like, obviously with perimenopause and menopause, like the changes, those distinct changes in hormones are going to play a role too. So we can kind of dive into that. But I think that for women, iron considerations and iron needs are higher just typically in general, especially because we lose blood, each month if we're prior to perimenopause and menopause. And then also, calcium needs, we're at increased risk of osteoporosis. So, our calcium needs are a bit higher. But as far as like, there's certain nutrients during our different phases of our cycle because of our hormone fluctuations. So like during our luteal phase, which is kind of like that lead up to getting your period and bleeding, magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, like those are particularly important during that phase, that cycle phase. When it comes to fat metabolism, women tend to metabolize fat a bit more efficiently than men, especially at moderate intensities. And so this is something to keep in mind, where it's like, okay, we can probably rely on more fat for fuel at those lower to moderate intensities a bit more efficiently than men, or compared to men. But once you get to those higher intensities, talking about like 75% or higher of VO2 max, it's fairly similar to men. When it comes to carb metabolism, this is probably something that carbohydrate utilization, this particularly changes during our menstrual cycle and can go from high carbohydrate utilization during our follicular phase. So this is like after the phase after we finish bleeding, it's like this is when we kind of feel the best, we're going to have the most energy, so we're really efficient at metabolizing carbohydrates during this time frame. But then that changes a bit during our luteal phase, which is that lead up to your bleeding, right? And so that's that's when it's the lowest. And so it's kind of like, it's hard to just blanket statement say, we're more efficient at metabolizing carbohydrates. It's like, well, we have to consider these changes throughout the menstrual cycle, and you'll probably have questions more about like the different menstrual cycle phases and training and nutrition. So I'll let you talk if
Yeah,
you want
so
to.
then, and this is something too that it's kind of becoming a thing where people are talking about how they differ their training around their cycle. And it's something that I've never done it. And it was never something that I was ever talked about growing up in racing track. And a lot of it too is just, and my feelings around it also are, especially as athletes where we have dates where we have to perform, is you
Yeah,
can't pick your performance date based around, your cycle. Like they are when they are. So I've always just trained as I have to train. And you take things into consideration. Like I know I might not feel fantastic today just based on my cycle, but I wouldn't necessarily change the workout plan. I would just,
yeah,
give myself a little bit more grace if I didn't smash a PB or something in a workout. Um, and sometimes too, like we do need a bit more carbs leading up to your period. So like you'll consider those things, but I've never changed my training plan based on it. So again, like your feelings around it too, and as an athlete, how do you change your training specifically? And then you program, obviously I'm assuming you program nutrition for your clients based around their cycle as well.
yeah. And every woman has different symptoms around over the course of a month, right? And I think that's really important and that's really key to this discussion because, I'm similar to you, Bethany, where it's like I don't, I might have a little bit of bloating here and there, or I might feel or I get a little bit moody, or I might have some cramps on occasion, but like they're not debilitating and they're not something that's very consistent for me. And I'm so grateful that that's my scenario. But I also know a lot of women who it's like this, it controls their like so much of their months. And, so I think depending on who you are and kind of what camp you fall into, you might be lucky and just not feel like you can kind of just do whatever. And like you said, manage expectations on the days when you're like, okay, you're tracking your cycle, what phase you're in, you're taking that into account when you're doing your training. And so if you're not, your performance output is a little bit lower than what you expected, you can kind of take that in, like you said, Bethany, take that into consideration. But then, on the flip side, it's like you might be an individual where, especially if you're not you don't have a competition, if you're supposed to do like a time trial or like a race simulation on a certain day, and where that's going to fall in your training cycle, and that's usually when your cramps are the worst, or you're bloated to the max, or you feel like, or you're dealing with digestive difficulties, it's like you might just swap that, and you might decide, hey, I'm going to swap this week. Maybe I'll do my deload week this week, and then or some coaches will actually, because oftentimes there's like a 3 week, they'll do like every fourth week is a deload. If coaches want to match that up with their client to just have that fall on their during their luteal phase, then that might be a great approach. But I think it really is dependent on the person, because we don't need to be catering to something that is not changing up, like if that's not, if the symptoms are very manageable, then I think it's worth just like going with the flow, and you just manage expectations. But I also recognize that, again, that's a luxury for some people don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. hmm Um, and then again, kind of going along with that, I'm at the age where I'm learning a lot about perimenopause and what needs to change around that time too, and menopause and perimenopause. And I just find now I have to be so much more tight on everything because my body is way more sensitive to everything, and even the potential for weight gain is easier, and it's just a lot more changes, and even being like super consistent with supplements and stuff like that. And even like recovery is a lot more difficult than it used to be. So, I have to be on top of certain things like my protein intake. Like I just can't mess around anymore. Like your body's not as forgiving as it was when you were 20. So then like dealing with women who are going through perimenopause or they are even like postmenopausal, then what do you take into consideration nutrition wise?
Yeah. I think just like you said, Bethany, like it's a less forgiving phase of your life and of a woman's life. And I think that if you can establish really good habits, like nutrition habits leading up to that time frame, like that's amazing because now you're not going to be already dealing with some of the implications of being in perimenopause or menopause and then like trying to figure out what all the things you need to change instead of just like, okay, well, I've been working on building up these habits. I've been working on, increasing my protein intake or prioritizing my protein intake and focusing on fiber rich foods. And so when you enter that phase, sure, it's less forgiving. You probably will have to take it up a notch, but at least you can just step it up a notch as opposed to like, oh crap, I haven't done anything to like really prioritize nutrition. And now I'm staring this down. Like now I'm experiencing all of these changes. So yeah, you named one for sure, Bethany, where it was like, your protein intake, your protein needs increase as we age. And this goes across the board for men and women. But as we age, we're more resistant to muscle or to protein anabolism. So like we're building muscle, like your body's actually for several different reasons, but one of them being hormonal changes, like we're resistant, our body's more resistant to building muscle. And so it's going to take higher amounts of protein. So if you already, again, have that great solid base of getting adequate protein intake throughout your day and at your meals and snacks, like that's a great starting point because now we can just build a little bit more on top of that instead of it feeling like, well, I didn't focus on protein at all. And now I've got to like do even more on top of what like someone in their 20s or 30s might be doing. So that's important. But also within that, it's like the quality of protein, the leucine content of protein, which, that's part of. So leucine is the primary amino acid, which is a building block of protein that's responsible for or highly involved in muscle building. And so if you have a poor protein source, this is going to be like oftentimes protein sources that are low in leucine. So your highest leucine sources of protein are going to be eggs, poultry, fish, tofu, or soy products if you're vegan or vegetarian, whey, still coming from milk products, or like high quality plant proteins. But usually animal proteins tend to have higher leucine contents and tend to be like better for muscle building compared to single plant sources, which is why like if you are relying on plant-based proteins, it's important to get a combination. Like I always say this for my vegetarian or vegan or just like more plant-based individuals. From a protein powder perspective, like you really want to make sure that you get a plant-based protein powder that has multiple sources of protein. You don't want just pea protein. You don't want just brown rice protein because each plant in a single plant lacks some of the sufficient amounts of those amino acids, essential amino acids. So if you get multiple plants together, they will round out those amino acid profiles and make sure that you're getting a complete protein. But yeah, so that's very important in that perimenopause and menopause state for carbohydrates. Again, because body composition, changes a bit during perimenopause or can change a bit. And, maybe you're losing lean muscle mass, maybe fat accumulation is increasing. We want to be strategic about our carbohydrate intakes and focus on fiber rich carbs that are going to help support gut health and blood sugar regulation. But when I say strategic with our carbohydrates, I mean, just looking at your day and considering, most of us, myself included, I'm active during portions of my day and then I'm very sedentary at my desk. So it's like I don't need to be eating a ton of carbohydrates necessarily. Like if I'm training in the morning, my carbohydrates should be more focused around, again, especially if I'm in perimenopause or menopause, but like my carbs should be targeted before my workout, after my workout to help replenish those glycogen stores. And then maybe throughout the day, I can be a little bit more focused on just really fiber rich carbohydrates, lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes. And then towards dinner time, because again, dinner is going to be that last meal before the next morning when I train. I'm not getting a full meal maybe before my workout. So dinner is going to be important from a carbohydrate standpoint to feed into that training session. So many people like kind of what I'll see in their food logs, like just protein and vegetables. And then the next morning they have their training. And I'm like, wait, that last meal before, even though it was the day prior, like that was still your last meal before your workout. We need to make sure that there's carbs there so that you have something to sustenance to go off of in your workout. So that's what I mean by strategic carbohydrate timing and placement, so that maybe we're emphasizing more of our active parts of the day and reducing some of that intake, that carbohydrate intake at other parts of the day. And then for fats, we know fats are super important for our hormone production, hormone health. And so we really focus on those omega-3 fats found in salmon and fatty fish and flax seeds and walnuts. We know that that's helpful for fighting inflammation, joint health, cognition. So, that's important. And that kind of leads into some of the gut health, topics that maybe we'll touch on at some point. But the last thing that I'll say is like during perimenopause and menopause, like sleep is a big challenge from, the clients that I've worked with. Obviously, I'm not in perimenopause yet, but this is similarly Bethany, I'm headed for it. So may as well learn more about it. And also it's a lot of my clientele too. So we know that poor sleep impacts your recovery. It impacts hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin, and stress response. So it's like, it's kind of setting us up a little bit for sabotage, where it's like, okay, now like we're getting poor sleep and maybe our calorie needs aren't quite as high as they used to be. And we're starting to see some of this fat accumulation, and we're more susceptible to losing lean muscle mass. And now my hunger is way through the roof, but I know it's just a result of my poor sleep. It's not actually because my intake or my needs are higher. It's because I just feel hungrier because I didn't get enough sleep. So this, like focusing on evening protein intake before bed, so that your blood sugar, not your blood sugar, but you're getting that constant source of, or a longer breakdown of protein across the evening and the nighttime. That's important. Magnesium before bed to kind of help with sleep, and just mindful eating to support, like mindful eating. This might go back to like some of the time restricted eating or fasting if you want with Bethany, but like maybe you experiment with different cutoff times for food so that you realize, so that you kind of make sure that if late night eating is part of your current regimen, like maybe cutting that off a little bit earlier might help with your sleep quality if you can have a lot of your food digested ahead of time, or before. And then, we're like, if you're big caffeine consumer or alcohol consumer, considering reducing alcohol intake, but also from a caffeine standpoint, look at how late into the day you're consuming that. Like you might need to, maybe usually have your last cup of coffee around 2 o'clock, but that might be the thing that's keeping you up, even though in your 20s and 30s, that was no problem. So you might have like an earlier cutoff time for caffeine.
Mm-hmm. Sleep is such a big one for so many of my clients, and it's almost one of the ones where some of it isn't always entirely in their control either, because, you're a mom and your kids keep you up at night. Like, I can't always control when I go to bed because I have kids and they seem to control when I go to bed. So it's such a tricky one. But again, it's something that like you got to figure it out too, because, losing sleep over time, it can just be so detrimental. And again, as an athlete's perspective, that's where we recover. And like personally, I've found some things that do really help. Like I have really bad restless leg syndrome, so I take magnesium before bed, and even like supplements like L-theanine and GABA, and I have a before bed tea like chamomile tea, and just things to like kind of calm the nervous system too. And there's so many facets to why we don't sleep sometimes, and even looking at the nutrition piece, but even unwinding from an autonomic nervous system standpoint, like just ways to kind of like shift into that parasympathetic nervous system. So finding ways that kind of help that too. So yeah, that's a big one, especially women going through perimenopause and menopause too, and getting your hormones checked. Like, progesterone helps with sleep. So if you're struggling there, like, get that figured out too. So yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, and I think that you know, like when it comes to sleep, we I think sometimes like we rely on like we're doing things that we've always done, and then like we get to this stage in our lives, and then it's like, wait, what I was always doing no longer applies in this scenario, or I'm gonna have to rewrite some things. And that bedtime routine is an important part of that. And sometimes it's nutrition and supplement related, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's looking at like your screen time before bed, or your regimen, and like making sure like, okay, well, are you staring with your in the dark with your phone right right here in front of your face for an hour, or scrolling Instagram beforehand? And like maybe we need to look at that. Or maybe maybe we need to try reading a book, or maybe we need to try like changing the thermostat and making it a little bit colder at night so we can sleep more. So it's like there's a lot of things that we just have to consider. And that's what I love. It's like so fascinating, but also so complex about like nutrition and lifestyle changes, like things that have worked at some point in time, like that might shift over time. And so we just have to be willing to maybe trial and error some things, and realize like, what we've done in the past might not be something that we're taking with us into the future.
Hmm. Yeah, and something else that you said too is a good segue into you mentioned our gut microbiome, and in some ways that's also related too, because our microbiome affects so many different aspects of our life. And some of it is mood stabilizing, and when it's and our energy levels, and it's a bit of a catchphrase too right now. We're like learning more and more about it, and a lot of the research is still very new around what the gut microbiome really does control. And we've heard it called the second brain, and just the relationships there, and with like the production of our neurotransmitters. So a lot of mood altering disorders and stuff like that too. So for someone who might think that they could be struggling with an issue with their gut microbiome, what would be some things that they could do to help trying to fix that?
Yeah, the cool thing about our gut health and gut microbiome is like there's very few things that it does not impact. So the great thing is like if you can focus on gut health, and again, like even though performance nutrition has its own like it's not going to always overlap with everything for general nutrition, for health and wellness and longevity, right? Like there's offsets of it, but it's like a Venn diagram. There's that shared part in the middle. And something that I'm passionate about is helping individuals balance or find harmony between performance nutrition and nutrition for health, wellness, longevity. Because it's like most of us are recreational athletes, right? Like maybe we're doing it a lot, but like most of us aren't getting paid full time for it. And so it's like, yeah, we want to pursue the things we love, and perform at our best and do these fun races, but it's like we also are very much looking out for our long-term health and wellness. And so it's like, how can we put those two together? And I think gut health is one of those things where it's like we can absolutely focus on gut health and still have it be part of the bigger picture with performance nutrition. And again, going back to like Dave, what you were saying earlier with like your nutrition, like you're like, oh, I feel like I'm adequately nourished, or maybe a little bit I'm adequately fueled, or maybe potentially over fueled, but undernourished. Like
Yeah.
lacking some of those nutrients, like bringing those back into your diet, like that's going to be a lot of this is going to be foods that are directly impacting your gut microbiome. So it's like we can absolutely fit that into the bigger picture of macros and calories and getting enough energy to support your training, and harmonize it all. And the good thing is like, yes, then it impacts sleep and hormones and, your metabolism and, so many wonderful components of our health that, that rely on the byproducts of what our gut microbes produce. And so if you think about it, like there's just to break it down in more like simple terms, there's prebiotics, there's probiotics, and then there's postbiotics. And it goes in that order of like so the prebiotics are what feed. So sorry. If you take the probiotics, which most of us are pretty familiar with, because they're like, oh, yeah, I take probiotics or whatnot. Or there's probiotics in yogurt and kimchi and sauerkraut and like fermented foods. It's like probiotics are the actual organism. That is the gut microbe. That's like those are the microbes that are living inside of our gut. And there's good ones and bad ones, things that promote inflammation and ones that fight inflammation. So we don't have to dive necessarily too far down that rabbit hole, but you've got your probiotics. And so your prebiotics, meaning before. So think about it, they come before the probiotics or they feed the probiotics. So it's like if you have your prebiotics, then you've got food for the little critters. And now those critters can thrive and multiply and replicate and do all the things that they should be doing to create a healthy gut microbe. So prebiotics are going to be your fiber rich foods primarily. So, your fruits and vegetables, your nuts, seeds, legumes, beans, whole grains, like pretty much all of your whole food carbs are essentially going to have some amount of fiber content that is going to be beneficial for so many reasons, nutrient wise, but also because of that fiber content. And it's now creating we think of fiber as like, oh, that's the stuff that like adds bulk to your stools and just makes you go to the bathroom. It's like, well, yeah, I guess if we're going to go from point A to like all the way to the very last point and we're going to skip all the fun stuff in the middle, sure, yes, like that's the point, that there's merit to that. But what we're skipping oftentimes in that explanation is like just how profound that fiber is to feeding the microbes in our gut before they get excreted or before they add bulk to our stool and then get excreted. So fiber is super important to feed those microbes. And so if we think about taking, and I'll just probably jump to one of your other questions just to cover this, Bethany, but like if we think about taking probiotics, which I think a lot of people do, probiotics, it's a great topic. I was like, I'm like describing this now, Bethany, because I feel like if it was one of those things where you're like rapid fire, hey, is this a worthwhile supplement? It would be one of those ones where I'm like, I can't answer that yes or no, but because of this longer explanation. But like you can spend a pretty penny on some probiotics, right? You get the live ones that are refrigerated and like there's billions of CFUs in it, which means like billions of different types of microbes and good bacteria. And you'll spend a lot of money on it, but like, and if you're taking it consistently, sure, you're literally putting the critters into your body, but they're not going to survive and thrive if you don't have the environment, you don't have the food to feed it, right? It would just be like getting a new hamster every day. Like you just feed it. Maybe that's a terrible analogy, but like, you're just like, it's only, it's only there because you put it there, but it's not actually like thriving and can't survive on its own. So probiotics aren't going to be, I think probiotics are helpful in periods of you're taking an antibiotic or on an antibiotic for something. We know that wipes out a lot of your good and bad bacteria, which is, we need that, right? Usually we're on antibiotics if we need to get rid of like whatever bad bacteria is in our body, but it's going to take out a lot of the good gut bacteria. So we might need some help from outside sources of probiotics to get into our gut. But we also need to make sure that they thrive and stay alive and multiply. But is that something we need to take on a daily basis? Like not if you're eating a lot of varied foods, right? Lots of different foods, because if we're eating the same foods over and over again, they're going to have the same bacteria, the same microbes. And so we want to make sure that we're getting a lot of versatility with food to introduce new strains of bacteria that will produce different nutrients and different anti-inflammatory compounds throughout the body. But we also want to make sure that they stay alive. So that's where we need to have the fiber. So I think probiotics can be great for a short period of time when you need it, when you know you've taken a hit. But I don't think it's something that you need to take all the time, because you should rely on just like having high fiber foods and just our natural, natural state of good gut bacteria. Or if we know that our bad gut bacteria is taking over our good gut bacteria, okay, maybe that's an instance where we need to change the change the tides a little bit and make sure we've got more good guys than bad guys. So that's probiotics and prebiotics, which feed the probiotics, and then you have the postbiotics, which are the byproducts of your probiotics. So it's like basically what those little critters, the byproducts of their metabolism and fermentation of those fibrous foods. And those postbiotics are incredible. Like that is what has this systemic, really positive response in our body from an inflammation standpoint that's going to impact our sleep, our cognition, our performance, like our inflammation throughout the body, your mood. Like there's so many, like they create short chain fatty acids among some other byproducts that circulate throughout our body, and that's what has the most amazing impact on our health and well-being. And so if anyone's interested, like that would be something to look up, of like, okay, what can all these things do? But there's a great book called Fiber Fueled by Dr. Will Bulsiewicz, and he's kind of like the leading doctor. He's like kind of the leading gut health expert. And I just love his book. I love learning about fiber from him. And so if anyone wants like more resources, he would be a great guy to look into and read books from, and listen to some of his podcasts.
So you've said obviously then it sounds like focusing on fiber, and this is one where I find people do not get enough of this. So what do you recommend then for how much fiber people should be getting in a day?
So general recommendations are so fiber is a subset of carbohydrates. So if you're not eating carbohydrates, or you're like on a keto diet, for example, carbohydrates are less than 10% of total calorie intake, you're hardly going to get any fiber, because fiber is only found in carbohydrates. So I think it's important to set that stage of like, fiber is a component of plants, and plants are all carbohydrates for the most. Like they might have some fats in it, like nuts or avocado, but like there's elements of carbohydrates in every single plant. So fiber is only found in plants. So it's like, unless it's added to a food product, like added fiber. So anyway, so you need carbohydrates to have fiber. And so there's, depending on your dietary preference, excuse me, that like if you're restricting or avoiding carbohydrates, like your fiber intake is probably going to be low. But the general rule or recommendation is for every 1,000 calories, we want to aim for 14 grams of fiber. So, if you're on a 2,000 calorie diet, that's about 28 grams of fiber. Or sometimes you'll see the recommendation 25 grams per day for women, 35 grams a day for men, because just equating some of those general calorie differences between men and women. But the more is always better. But I will say, like, I'm a huge advocate for like trying to meet that as a minimum goal, but then reaching for the stars beyond that. The thing to keep in mind, especially as athletes, is knowing when it's probably not ideal to have really fiber rich foods, but also recognizing too that, if you go from like no fiber intake to then like a ton of fiber all of a sudden, you're going to feel that. You're going to be sitting on the toilet for a little while. So I think it's important to gradually increase that, especially if you're going from not focusing on this at all to then really going hard on it. And I will say, everyone gets really excited because they're like, oh, I'll take some Metamucil, or I'll take a bunch of fiber supplements. And I've learned this more in like recent years than not, but it's like the fiber that's intact to like a whole food has greater benefits, nutritional benefits, and fibrous benefits compared to like a supplemental form of fiber. An exception, so like psyllium husk is often found in like it's the usually the fiber, like what's contributing the fiber in a lot of supplements. And psyllium husk is like, I mean, it is technically a food, like a plant food. And so I think if you add that into some foods, it's not, doesn't taste good. So I'm going to put that out there. Like I would
It's
much prefer, I
awful.
would recommend like you get a powder and you just like, it's like tastes like dirt. And then you don't want to put that in any of your foods. So
Literally sawdust.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not my favorite thing, but I do have a bag of it and it's has not been touched in a long time. But you know, of course, if you need the help, if you're really not having consistent bowel movements, like you should be having a bowel movement each day and ideally more than one, right? I think a lot of people we settle with one because we have a lot of individuals in the United States and worldwide that just like, you know, that's become the norm is to say go to the bathroom once a day, but it's like or go number two once a day, but it's like that's been reduced because I feel like we just have a generally um unhealthy population, especially from a gut health standpoint. But if you're struggling with having regular bowel movements and you need to just start with a supplement, like a Metamucil supplement or some sort of fiber supplement off the bat, great, go for that, start there. Or if, you know, a lot of clients who like love those carb balance wraps that have like 12 grams of fiber in them. And I'm like, that's all. If we look at the ingredients, like that is added into this supplement. So, or into this food product. So ideally, we're trying to increase our whole food, high fiber foods and opting for less like processed foods that just have fiber added in them and or less reliance on supplemental fiber because again we're not getting as much out of that. Ideally, like the foods that are rich in fiber are also packaged with some of the best micronutrients and vitamins and minerals as well. So it's like why not just opt for more of those foods instead of trying to like supplement with everything.
So when you say that, and I know Beth has a list here, and this kind of I think kind of rolls into it. When you talk about trying to get everything through whole foods, through your proper diet, and then supplements.
Mm-hmm.
So, or Beth, I know you had a list of supplements you wanted to go through on the good and the bad, the yay, the nay, stuff like that. So thought might be a good time to roll that out.
Yeah, so I and you've touched on a lot of them too, which is interesting because you've also explained with some of these when it is appropriate for people. So I have a list and it's not too long, but and you can just say buy it, waste of money, or only if needed.
Okay,
Um,
I'm really bad at these because I feel like I'm gonna have like interjections of like conditional
you're like,
basis.
but
But I'll if it's worth educating on, which it probably will be, but I'll expand, but I'll try to stick with your
yeah. Okay, creatine.
buy it.
Mhm. I think that's generally well accepted now, and again, it's becoming more and more popular. So go for
Even
it.
I know
And I
that.
will say, Bethany,
Mhm.
what did you say, Dave?
Even I know that one.
Yeah, and I will say, like, yes, from a sports and performance standpoint, great, like strength, power output, all that stuff. But and in some cases, endurance. But we're seeing a lot of benefits as well for creatine in perimenopause and postmenopausal women from like cognition, from more of like a cognitive health standpoint. So even for some of my ladies who tend to be the more resistant individuals to creatine supplementation, I think that's an added benefit of like, okay, well, maybe, you know, if you're in your 40s and you've never taken it before and you're hesitant and you don't know if you train hard enough to warrant it, which is, I think I hear that a lot. It's like, well, at least consider it for the other benefits, like the cognitive benefits as
Yeah.
well.
Or if you've had concussions, also just add that in there. Greens powders.
I'm gonna say waste.
Yeah.
Hold on,
You
so
Can I
obviously
elaborate on that? Should I say, Dave,
I
what
don't even know what did you just say was I because I'm not
greens
like green powder?
powders.
greens powder, so I'm not even familiar with what that is.
Well, it's just like you can get like greens powders, like spirulina and like mixes of greens that
Oh, okay, I
you'd add
understand.
to
Okay.
your shake or something.
I understand. Yes.
People rely on it who feel like they, if you don't get enough vegetables and stuff, then
Fake veggies.
They're
yeah,
like, why eat my vegetables when I can just drink it down here in one
yeah,
little shot? So yeah, I'm always an advocate for like, you know, you can hardly get the same benefits from like a encapsulated version of some of the most micronutrient dense foods. But I think with those two is there's also, especially when it comes with powders and supplements, like it's so unregulated that you don't actually know necessarily how much, like it's not FDA regulated. So you also risk contamination with heavy metals. There's a lot of heavy metal contamination, especially in like plant-based protein powders and and greens powders. So, you want to make sure if you're going to take it as it's from a reputable brand, but also I think it's a great thing as like if you're traveling and you're not getting a lot of vegetables in, okay, take that for that period of time to help at least give you something, but it shouldn't be just like a security blanket of like, well, I'm not going to really focus on vegetables in my diet, so I'm just going to take this green powder and be good. Like that's not a good use for it.
Yeah. So then kind of touching on that too, then protein powders.
I say I think buy it. I am a fan of protein powders when, especially for individuals who struggle getting enough to meet their needs. And especially when we're talking about perimenopause, menopausal women, or just aging athletes, like, even Dave, for example. But like, even, and I don't mean to only be like addressing middle-aged women. I think it's important to understand that just as we all age, our protein intake, our protein needs increase. And so for some individuals who might not have relied on protein powder for a long time, and might not have needed to, but and reach their daily needs. Now they have an increase of, they're trying to shoot for a little bit higher protein intake. And they're like, how am I going to get this in through food? Or if we are managing or working with a tighter calorie budget and we need to get high protein intake without extra fats and calories, like an isolated, like just protein powder that's just going to provide protein and nothing else, like that can be a huge asset to some individuals who are struggling with that protein goal.
Mhm. Um, Carnitine.
Um, what was it was like buy it, don't buy it, and then like what was
Only if needed.
yeah, I think that's an only if needed option. I wouldn't blanket statement that for like everyone necessarily.
Mhm. Magnesium.
If needed, I think that's a good one. I think, yeah, if needed.
If
There's
needed.
more uses, I think, for that, especially in an athletic population. So I would have no problem with like most athletes taking it, but I also think we should have a reason or understand like what its use is for, and also like if we struggle with that, right? So if like you've got an athlete who's sleeping great and getting a well-balanced diet, they're eating a lot, like they have lots of magnesium rich foods in their diet, I don't think they need to necessarily supplement with that, but but it is a micronutrient that, especially for women in like in their reproductive years, that is a nutrient that we tend to lose during certain phases of our cycle. And being an athlete on top of that, we tend to can be a little bit deficient in that as well.
So kind of similar with that one then. Zinc.
Um, I think conditional for that one. Definitely think there's times of the month, times of, especially from like a immune support standpoint, like times when supplementing with that can be very helpful to kind of prevent sickness or to kind of boost the immune system, especially before a race. And you're gonna like Dave, you're gonna see a bunch of people, and you're just like, oh gosh, let me just look up on some zinc for the first few days or leading up to it. Like that would be a good situation to do that.
Collagen. And we did kind of touch on this, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that can be a universal, I would say buy, I mean, it's so inexpensive now. Um, and you can find it kind of anywhere. It's like, sure, it's not a bad idea, but are you going to be just fine without it? Yeah, you will be too. So, I think it's a little bit more conditional of like, okay, if you need joint ligament support, hair, skin, nails, cool, go for it. Probably not going to break the bank, but I don't think everyone needs to get it.
Mhm. Omega 3s.
Buy it. I think that's one that most people should be taking. I would say like blanket micronutrient, or sorry, blanket vitamins that like pretty much everyone should be taking. Omega 3s, unless you're getting so much, like, you
Fish.
eat salmon several times per week and you're getting lots of walnuts and flax seeds, and like, it's like, that's great, but that's not normally the majority of individuals. And it's one that really is an important one for a lot of different things: heart health, cognition, eye health, but also from an inflammation standpoint. It's a great and very potent anti-inflammatory. So it's like just taking, 1,000 milligrams EPA, DHA per day can go a long way. Yeah, so I would say that, and then vitamin D was the other one that like most.
That was my next one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one. It's just most of us, like, our primary source of vitamin D is through the sun, and most of us are inside a lot of the day. Even if we're outside, we're wearing sunblock or protective layering, so like we're really not getting as much absorption as we might think. And then cold, like especially during winter months when we're inside even more and lack sun exposure, like definitely needs to be a winter supplement, if not all year round.
Mhm. Um, with vitamin D, do you prefer liquid or pills?
I don't think it necessarily matters. I don't know that I have a preference. I will say it's funny you say that, because I was like, with my fish oil, I don't there, from like an efficiency standpoint, like, no, you can go either way, but oftentimes you have to look at the serving size, because in order to get like the recommended dosage, like sometimes it's like 3 capsules, or if you might take one and think, okay, I'm good, and it's like, no, you actually need several of those. I really like the liquid fish oil, like Carlson's Finest, like liquid fish oil, because it's you don't burp up those giant pills like
Mm.
have to really swallow them. And also it just has like a very light like lemon flavor, and it's just like almost like having a little teaspoon of olive oil per day. And I found that bottle, like on Amazon, there's like 100 servings of it, and 1 teaspoon is a serving, and you're getting that 1,000 milligrams right there. So I'm just like, yeah, it's a little pricey, but from a per serving standpoint, you're actually getting really good bang for your buck on that.
Mhm. Um, BCAAs. You did briefly talk about this one too, but
Yeah, I'd say more conditional, but they're so inexpensive, and people just like sometimes having something flavorful to drink before their workout, that it's certainly not gonna hurt, but I think some people put a lot more into like what it's doing for them benefit wise than what it really is. It's like, hey, it's not a substitute for protein, but if you're gonna go into a workout fasted, um, that would be a minimum from a protein standpoint that I'd want you to have.
Mhm. The last one on my list you did touch on, and it was probiotics, and it sounds like that one is also very much conditional. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, obviously like a really well balanced diet that is inclusive of a lot of things and doesn't entail a lot of restrictions can cover so many of your bases, even as athletes. But, the more physical demands on our that we put on our bodies, we have to be prepared and ready to make up that difference with even more concerted nutritional efforts, right? And that can include supplementation, or should, or sometimes oftentimes involve supplementation. But if we're expecting a lot of our bodies, we need to know, like, hey, we have a an obligation or a responsibility to make sure that we're filling in the gaps and giving our body what it needs, or else we're only going to be able to sustain it for so long before something comes crashing down, right? Injury, sickness, burnout, there's a lot of things that fall under that category.
Well,
Mhm.
I think if Beth, if you're all right, I think we should call that one for today.
Mhm.
And then I'm sure, well, I know Beth, I know she's got a dozen more questions. Um, then she would probably go on for another 3 hours. And I get feeling even dumber.
No, not at all. But I would love, part two, part three. I'm like, I love getting this information out to as many ears as possible.
Mhm.
I think like Beth, this is mostly Beth's idea, but I think it's so valuable because there's so many of us who are like myself who are a little bit ignorant of, and I'm not saying that, people say ignorant like it's a bad thing. No, I'm just not educated. I don't have that knowledge. And I think sometimes you can provide some solutions or at least some direction for people to go in the right way to start improving. So I think it's fantastic. I know for me, I actually learned a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the hardest things right now for people is we have an overload of information. So then what often happens is people are just like, forget it. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing because, nothing bad has happened yet or whatever. Because, you hear about some, and a lot of it's again because of social media, but you hear about something and then you hear all these different perspectives, and a lot of it's also coming from people who are uneducated. And then it just gets to be so overwhelming because you're like, I don't even know what to believe anymore. So I think it's also important to kind of sift through the myths what that and the stuff that we hear about online that's just it's not always true and it's not always good for everybody. And yeah, so I think that's also why it's important to have these conversations because there is just so much information out there and a lot of people are also just, steered in the wrong direction. So,
Yeah,
you have to talk about it.
definitely. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Let's just say what Beth said right there would be a great one for the next one is sifting through the myths.
Yes. I will
Yeah.
say a lot of my work with clients is like undoing a lot of behaviors that were learned through some of these, um, poor sources of of nutrition information, or it's just like, or coaches that, have that cookie cutter, maybe macro approach to everything. And that, that's not how they, maybe they're struggling with an eating disorder or have a history of disordered eating behaviors. And it's like, that's not, that's not going to be the tool that helps them achieve a better relationship with food. So yeah, I would love to come back on and debunk some things and whatever other questions you guys have.
But you just said there remind me of a saying, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing.
So true. And what's that with like paired with the confidence? What was that like
Yeah.
knowledge confidence interval where like we get a little bit of knowledge and our confidence is super high and that's a very dangerous thing too.
All
Mhm.
right, Beth, why don't you wind us out?
Yeah, thanks so much, Karina. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I know a lot of people are going to get a lot of benefit to it also. So, and again, if anyone's listening to this, please submit your questions. We'll have another chat with Karina, and we can title it "Sifting Through the Myths." So, anything that you really want to know a little bit more about, or things that you've heard that you're unsure about. So, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, Karina, and we've I think a lot of us have learned a lot. So, thank you very much for that.
Well, I'm so glad. And you guys, I'm working on getting more consistent with posting on social media, but this is a big year for like me wanting to get more nutrition content out there and provide more free resources for individuals. So if you guys follow me on Instagram, and there's a link in my bio to connect with me or get more resources, or maybe you want to take the next step, like need actually some of that one-on-one support, feel free to find me and hit me up, message me, let me know if I can help any further, or if you just have some general questions that you want me to answer on my Instagram page over time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corinna.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.